Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the COVID-19 Information Center at the Commerce Regional Council in Windhoek. My name is Johan Kutsia, and I am reporting on behalf of NMH brands Namibian Sun, Republican, and Algemene Zeitung. Today, we are going to hear from the ED of Labour, Mr. Bro Matthew Shingwaja, around some of the issues that have arisen due to the COVID-19 pandemic. These include unpaid leave, grants to workers who have lost their jobs, and also what the Labour Ministry is doing in consultation with the private sector to ensure that the economic impact to workers are mitigated during this time. We'll also be hearing from the advisor to the Minister, Ms. Vicky Atoivo, on her take on the current situation. As I said, this morning will be an information sharing session. This afternoon we will get a chance to pose questions and to get feedback on the relevant issues. So please stay tuned and follow us on our live streaming platforms for more information. Thank you.
We have now confirmed case number 14. So in Namibia now, the confirmed cases are no longer 13, but for 14. And this is a contact of one of the cases which has been confirmed already.
Welcome back. My name is Jemima Bekus from Namibian Media Holding, Namibian Sun, Algemene Zeitung, and Republican. With me, I have Dr. Eric Schuba from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Dr. Eric, can you share with us, what do you think of Namibia's response towards COVID-19?
Well, I've been sitting with the government officials every day in the response and seeing a lot of work happening. There's teams working on finding the cases, tracing the contacts so we can see people that might be getting sick in the future, doing a lot of laboratory testing, managing the cases, preparing the hospitals so that they know what to do when these cases are coming, preparing isolation wards and things like that. And then a lot of public information too, things like what we just saw here, reaching out through the media to the public through many channels so Namibians understand what they need to know to protect themselves.
Now, Doctor, speaking about Namibians understanding how to protect themselves, in terms of flattening the curve, what do you think are some of the approaches the government has taken or implemented that has really contributed to flattening the curve?
Well, we know that social distancing makes a big difference. So that can happen at the broad level, things like the lockdown, closure of schools and different businesses, but also within people's daily lives, being sure that they're not congregating, that they're keeping distance from other people to the best that they can, only going out for necessities. That guidance has been going out from government, but it's up to communities to really take it seriously. And I've seen more and more over the days and weeks, Namibians doing just that.
From what you've seen from all over the world, do you foresee that this lockdown of the two regions may be well, obviously it will be extended to the rest of the country, but do you think it will be extended past April 17?
I think it's so hard to say right now because what happened here in Namibia was different than a lot of countries. The lockdown came with only a very small number of cases. So Namibia is trying to get ahead of this, whereas in other places it was only after they had thousands of cases that they did this. So we need to see. I know government will be watching. We as partners to the ministry here will be helping them look at what the results are of this lockdown to see what happens next.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
On all issues affecting the nation around the pandemic called COVID-19. This morning, we will be talking all things labor around the response of government to COVID-19. And to do that, I'm joined here by the ED of Ministry of Labour, Bro Matthew Shingwaja, as well as Advocate Aaron-Stein Toivo, to give us an all-rounder around how COVID-19 is affecting the labour market. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Edie, I think we can begin with you. COVID-19, of course, we say has come at a time where especially the economy of the country was recovering from a long drought. How has COVID-19 affected the labor market so far?
So, thank you very much. Yes, it is true. COVID-19 came as a surprise to many of us, and particularly in the labor market. The situation is normal to very uncertain one. Normal in the sense that if you speak to well-organized industries, they seem to have engagement between employees and employers trying to explain the situation, try to find workable measures and so on. But it is a little bit uncertain when you talk to some other industries where employees are not well organized. They also don't have up-to-date information. They do not know how to proceed. As a result, it is a very uncomfortable kind of a situation where some of these people are. But if you talk to the public sector, for example, where information seems to have filtered through, employees seem to have understood, and some of them are still working from home, those who can do. But in other areas like hospitality and tourism, I think it's a bit complicated for obvious reasons. The communication, I think it's not that what we wanted. Employers seem not to have engaged with their employees, and some of the employees were just notified by a notice put on a door saying, yes, from this day we stop, and no further explanation what will happen thereafter. You can imagine this type of employees are in a situation where they do not know what to do. Yes.
Well, I think, Edie, from what you're speaking now, should we come out positive from this COVID-19? We will have a lot of issues around labor, misadministration, and relations with employees. What has been the response with stakeholders, the unions and the Employers Federation? Where are they meeting government halfway to try to mitigate the loss of jobs during this very difficult time?
Yes. Last week we met with trade unions as well as the employers, and the idea of us meeting was to see how can we get through this period. There were a lot of suggestions which were made in a tripartite setup, and there were also some areas of disagreement, as you can imagine. When you have three parties always in this area, they tend to agree and also disagree. And one of the outcome of that meeting was definitely that we should not expect or encourage employers really to retrench their employees as the first result. We agree that employers and the employees should engage each other and try to find a solution. The second one was to see whether there could be some kind of relief from different institutions, to be specific, from Social Security Commission and other state-owned enterprises as well as the private sector, to assist the situation in terms of making sure that the employees are not losing their income and the businesses remain sustainable thereafter. To other recommendations of saying the state should also look at price control, especially on the items which are needed at this particular time. The sanitizers and other items which are necessary to keep the place and people hygiene. So those are wider areas we covered. And we are happy that some of these points have been taken up by the committee responsible for managing this pandemic.
Okay. Advocate, just building on what Edie was speaking about, of course, there are different types of employees, those that are only on a contract basis, those that were either permanent. What has been the discussions with really looking at how to ensure that post-COVID-19, or once the situation is in control, how do we get back to a situation where employees continue holding their jobs, or if they're to be let go, that they continue getting their benefits, and how to bring stability really to the labor market?
Thank you. To begin with, I think it's important to understand that the COVID-19 virus and the state of emergency do not not terminate contracts of employment. The only way that a contract of employment is terminated is if the employer takes action to terminate or if the employee resigns. Right? So the ministry, as the ED said, you know, we have encouraged employers not to take action to terminate, to dismiss their employees. Right? So the employees, even if they cannot come to work, they are still employees. They're still subject to a contract of employment. This is important both for the security of the employees, but also looking to the future. We have to plan now for an orderly way to resume business operations when it's possible. Now, I want to mention in that regard that we have a provision in the Labor Act for the retrenchment of employees. We do not think that retrenchment is a practical or desirable action to take at this point in time, because as of all of the uncertainty, and also because employers definitely will need employees when they resume, we think it's more important, it would be desirable to look at that situation once operations are able to resume. The other thing that I want to say is the ministry, and I would say the principles of state policy, put a premium on social dialogue and negotiations. In all areas, to the extent possible, we believe that problems can be understood and resolved by discussion. We were very, very encouraged to learn that in some of the industries where critical services have been designated, the employers and the trade union have met. They've even entered into agreements on what should take place during this period. So, yes, we are challenged by situations that we've never faced before. But the principle of job security, the principle of, to the extent possible, maintaining income for employees, and negotiation and social dialogue, I think is what is guiding all of us. Now, I just want to mention one thing in that regard that might get overlooked otherwise, which won't get overlooked, but we have workers who are the lowest paid and the most vulnerable. We don't believe that employers should consider asking these employees to reduce their wages because these employees can barely make it as it is. That's one thing. Then there's the question of domestic workers. If domestic workers are sent home, there may be employers who believe that they shouldn't pay them. We are of the opinion that these are workers who are very important to the survival of families and will be important after the state of emergency. So we've been involved in discussions where one company or another is talking about how we have to do this type of activity in order to maintain our plant or in order to maintain our business services. But the maintenance and the sustenance of human beings is a very, very important part of this discussion. So some employers, and certainly all of the employers who are receiving salaries at this point, in my opinion, do not have a justification for sending workers home and just saying, okay, come back later, but paying them nothing. I don't think it's necessary. But even many employers have reserves. They also have access to loan facilities that their workers do not. So I think all of these things have to be taken into account. Businesses will not resume and prosper if the the workers have somehow been crippled. Their health has been diminished. They're not going to go out and say, fine, we'll look for new workers. These are very valuable people who will contribute to the recovery.
What I'm hearing from you, Advocate, is that really there is no debate about balancing the economy or businesses as opposed to life and health. But how then is the ministry trying to balance those interests? Because you do speak about negotiation and about dialogue, but if there's no common ground or consensus being met, what further steps would the ministry will embark on to ensure that really that we maintain the income for especially low income earners, job security, and so on?
Well, I don't think this is simply something within the power of the ministry. There are certain financial measures that have already been announced, that a certain degree of grant will be provided to workers. That's one thing. There are other things that could be looked at within the confines of the Labor Act, although they're very limited. One is there's the matter of sick pay. Certainly anyone who becomes ill will be entitled to sick pay. And also, in terms of the Social Security Act, there's an extended sickness benefit once the statutory sick benefit is exhausted. We would encourage employers to interpret the sickness benefit of one that should also apply when someone has to take care of a family member who is ill. Secondly, there is a very modest benefit in the Labor Act called compassionate leave, which provides a payment for people in cases of death in the family, but also in the case of serious illness of family members. So those, but the stimulus package, as I understand it, when benefits are being given to companies, they are going to be tied to whether or not the companies retain their workers, whether they pay them. That is, I think, the nexus. And I want to say, I don't think we can balance the needs of the economy with the balances of the health of people. All of what we do will be guided by the health considerations. Health will not be compromised in any of the measures that we try to, and we will keep trying to convince employers to take some of the responsibility, and we will also keep trying to convince workers to understand the situation, to make their contribution too. There are provisions in the law, for example, that would permit a reduction if a company is operating. An employer can reduce the hours of employees by 1/2 and their income by up to 1/2. But even that provision contemplates that the parties will negotiate. So to us, the solution is for all of us to try to understand our respective positions and find common ground.
Thank you, Advocate. Edie, around workers that are doing essential and critical services at a time like this that is very necessary, are there any provisions compelling employers to ensure that there are certain safeguards put in place to ensure that these employees are protected against the contraction or the spread of COVID-19?
Thank you very much. Yes. The mere fact that the employees are rendering essential and critical services does not take their rights to protection. In fact, there are guidelines which are issued by World Health Organizations, supplemented by the International Labour Organization, which we also informed the industry. And that's what the Minister of Health and Social Services have been saying. Those basic measures remain at all times, no matter how the situation is. And as you can see, these are the employees who are at the front line of this situation. They handle all reported cases, or they render necessary services, they deliver necessary goods at every time. Hence, they are protected. And they are also still employees in terms of the Labor Act. They are entitled to rest periods. They are entitled to leave if that is possible. So their rights are still intact. Yes.
Earlier you spoke about the different industries having different responses to COVID-19. Could you go a little bit deeper in that, especially when you compare industries such as the mining sector, the fishing sector, and so on? Really, what has been the different responses? What have been the challenges regarding that? But also, what are the mitigating factors to ensure that the industries don't crumble, but also that we continue maintaining the necessary health precautions we need to continue doing?
Yes, particularly the mining industry is one of the well-organized industries in this country. And yesterday you have a discussion around that sector. We were informed how several companies have put up measures to mitigate the situation. They are not contemplating of laying any employee at all. In fact, what they are doing, they also want to put their employees at a specific place or self-isolation so that they are safe on their own. Remember the motto in health, in labor, when you say a healthy employee is a productive employee. So they are looking beyond this current situation. They are looking forward when the situation becomes normal so that they have their all employees up and running to start production. In the fishing sector, it was a little bit of a mixed situation. The employers tend to say they have all the necessary measures in place. And while the unions are saying that might not be true at all companies. So we are still engaging through the Ministry of Fisheries and Marine Resources to find out which measures are those. And imagine we are still not encouraging a factory which have, say, 100 employees on the production line at the same time. I think that's not in line with the guidelines. But now in fishing, you have people who are at the workplace at the same time, 700 or so. We are saying that situation needs to be managed better. We understand the products which they are handling is a perishable product, but surely mechanism can be done so that people can put in manageable shifts so that they can finish those production. Those pieces of fish which they are legged. As for seagoing, that's still being a debate because remember, Erongo is one of the lockdown regions. I do not know how the employers in that sector will be able to manage to send the vessel to fishing grounds. And again, that's one of the very, very, very maybe sensitive area because a fishing boat which becomes a working place and then you put fishers there who are probably 20, 15, one vessel and something happens. How are you going to control that? So all these things we are saying, as much as industry is saying they are ready, we want the Minister of Health and Social Welfare, Social Services, to also ensure that that's measures which are being spoken to are truly meeting the standards so that we are not putting our employees at risk and we may not even contain the virus as we want. So, thank you.
Yeah.
Can I just mention something in that connection? There is a provision in the Labor Act which gives an employee the right to leave a place of work if the employee has reason to believe that the place of work is neither safe nor healthy. They must notify the employer, and they're entitled to stay away until the unsafe or unhealthy conditions are eliminated. Now, that is why in addition to the advice and guidance of the Ministry of Health, we place so much importance on consultation because we don't want to have situations of disruption. These are problems that we are trying as best as we can to iron out in advance so that both the employers and the employees have agreed of how work should proceed.
What has been the challenges with that at the moment? Of course, there are guidelines to ensure that gatherings don't happen and so on. Has there been a challenge in getting all the parties together on one table and then agreeing to some of this?
Well, this has been going on for a fairly short period of time. I want to say that from what I've read in the world, there are challenges. There are places where employees have refused to work, and there are even places where employees have walked out. We are doing everything we can to try to preempt that. And I think it's important also that the president or other leaders, they're communicating with the public. That's a part of it, because at the end of the day, we want to forge some kind of common understanding that we all have to contribute to, I don't know if the right word is success, but to effectively address the problem confining us, and to keep in mind that there is a longer term.
Yes.
And both of those we have to look at the same time.
You speak about the provision that an employee can leave a workplace should they feel unsafe and so on. What are the safeguards? If an employer, for example, decides to terminate their employment because of this action they took, what are some of the protections this employee have? Maybe not now, but perhaps once the situation has normalized. I do know there's a dispute resolution process that can happen. Would that be one way an employee can seek redress?
Well, the Labor Act provides that if the employee leaves the place of work under those circumstances and has a reasonable basis to do so, they are entitled to the same conditions of service that they had when they left the place of work. They must continue, which includes the same remuneration. Now, I don't think that this is a time for us to dwell on the legalities and technicalities. The safeguards are there, but as I said, most of these problems can be prevented, and so I think that's where we will put our emphasis. Any remedies that would be available to employees under the Labor Act, including remedies for unfair dismissal, for example, or unilateral unfair labor practices which prohibit unilateral changes in conditions of employment, they're available to the employees, but that's where, in a certain sense, we're talking academically. They're not going to be able to use these rights at the moment because of the situation prevailing. The rights are there. They won't be lost.
So perhaps, Advocate, are there any other arising issues that you'd like to make aware to the nation around the labor market that you feel are necessary at this point in time to communicate?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure.
Are there any arising issues from the discussions you've had with stakeholders, from the issues that are coming out in this particular time of the pandemic you would like to inform the nation about?
Well, one issue is not everyone understands that they have a responsibility to help to solve these problems. Some employers have just taken it for granted. They've gone under this notion which existed before we had labor laws of no work, no pay. They're looking at, all right, we're not operating today, so why should we pay anyone? No, our whole legal system is structured to eliminate that principle and define protections. But I want to say, if I may,
Yes.
maybe going beyond your question, we haven't talked about the informal economy.
Of course.
And the things that we've talked about so far really pertain to the formal economy and employee relations. The bigger challenge is in the informal economy. And before the COVID virus pandemic, we had been talking about and looking for how we could support the development of the informal economy and the people who work in the informal economy, so that they could become a part of the formal economy. But even if they can't become a part of the formal economy, how these businesses could be supported to develop, to employ people. They employ a very large percentage of people. And of course, many people are sole traders. There's now the government's response of making a cash grant available is, of course, welcome. But I think it's incumbent upon our ministry and other parts of government to consider how can we emerge from this crisis in a way that is going to strengthen the situation of these people in the informal economy. And I'm very happy that, for example, Social Security is looking now at whether during the pandemic, is there any way for them to offer protection to informal economy workers who have not yet joined Social Security. So this type of an approach is welcome.
So I think what you're saying is this is creating an opportunity to have long-lasting solutions to problems that we have always faced, and how more and more people could come on board to actually play a bigger role to ensuring we respond effectively to the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you very much, Advocate. Any last words, Edie?
Yes, I think the emergence of COVID-19 and the declaration of the state of emergency, particularly the concept of working from home, have introduced a totally different dimension to the way we've been doing work. As much as not entirely surprising, it is probably urging us to think wider, so that when we enter the fourth industrial revolution, which exactly have that concept of working from a distance, we are better prepared, learning from this episode. The only thing we want to say from the labor point of view is, even if you have a very difficult situation at the workplace, either as a worker or as an employer, the best way is always to have a discussion. A discussion and find a solution to it. I know some people are saying, yes, an employer may not even afford anything. That's true. But remember, if you also send an employee away without anything, it's exactly the same thing. But if you discuss, you could have agreed to a number of things. One of them is what is underlined in terms of Section 12 of the Labor Act, where, of course, the employer may reduce working hours and correspondingly reduce the wage of an employee, but at least both of them will be able to see the next day. The other one is to agree or to rearrange the payment entirely, what we call deferral of payment. You can agree how many percentage I should take, and you will come and pay me the other percentage when the situation becomes normal. There are a host of things, but what we have seen is when an employer just say, go home. We have seen some of the big companies in this country have done that, at least 3 of them. So we are not really convinced whether this was done because of COVID-19 or they have some other considerations and they use this as a space, as a space either to do what they wanted to do. But as we are saying, I was listening yesterday from Botswana, and the government of Botswana sent a feeler that the time will come so that we see who was standing with us during the trying times and those who abandoned us. I think that's a very important consideration to take into, because I know when the situation comes to normal, everybody wants to look at the state to get this and that. We may come back and say, yes, where were you this time around when you were in these difficulties? So we have to look at this thing broader rather than an opportunity to dismiss employees or to deny employees their wages and rights. So as for the employees, I think it's a higher time also to reflect on this so that we have flexible positions on a number of issues. There is no probably a point to demand 100% payment if you know or if you are informed about the situation of the employer. You should also be able to say, fine, for us to see the next morning, what should we do? Flexibility is one of those issues you have to revisit and say, will this help me or will it put me in more trouble than I want to get out? Yes.
Thank you very much. I think the message is very clear around having more dialogue and a negotiation around these difficult times, but also to maintain the principles of safeguarding job security as well as maintaining incomes for the most vulnerable employees we have in society. So thank you very much, Advocate Edie, for joining us for this very short debrief around how COVID-19 is affecting the labor market in the country, whether it's the formal or informal economy. And we here at the COVID Communication Center continue to try to bring you information around how the different sectors in the country are responding to COVID-19. And we welcome questions through our official email, which is covid.num@mict.gov.na, so that we're able to have more of these conversations to keep you, the viewers, and the nation abreast about the developments around COVID-19. That's all the time we have today. Thank you very much.
Companies in this country have done that, at least 3 of them. So we are not really convinced whether this was done because of COVID-19 or they have some other considerations and they use this as a space, as a space either to do what they wanted to do, trying times, and those who abandoned us. I think that's a very important consideration to take into, because I know when the situation comes to normal, everybody wants to look at the state to get this and that. We may come back and say, yes, where were you this time around when you were in these difficulties? We may come back and say, yes, where were you this time around when you were in these difficulties? So we have to look at this thing broader rather than an opportunity to dismiss employees or to deny employees their wages and rights. So say, fine, for us to see the next morning, what should we do? Flexibility is one of those issues you have to revisit and say, will this help me or will it be put?
Consultation, because we don't want to have situations of disruption. These are problems that we are trying as best as we can to iron out in advance so that both the employers and the employees have agreed of how work should proceed in a short period of time. I want to say that from what I've read in the world, there are challenges. There are places where employees have refused to work, and there are even places where employees have walked out. We are doing everything we can to try to preempt that. And
So that concludes this morning's briefing here from the COVID Information Center at the Commerce Regional Council. We heard from Bro Matthew Singwaja, the Executive Director at the Ministry of Labour, talking about how companies, the private sector and the public sector must work together to find ways of supporting not only the other businesses but their workers during this time, and workers also taking making the effort to communicate with the company and to find ways that you can resolve and meet each other halfway. Advocate Vicky Atoivo also touched on how it is important that we protect the informal sector and that we look at interventions where we can come out better at the end. At the other side of this. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That was all from us here for this morning. Please join us again at 4 o'clock, where we will be having a further update on the situation at hand and also be posing questions to the relevant stakeholders. Thank you very much. And this is Johan Kutsia from the Commerce Regional Council in COVID Information Center. Thank you very much.